afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back from 3 weeks in Africa, and I'm very glad to be back here at the studio after that hiatus on the African continent. I went to several countries while I was there, and I'd like to report some of the things that I encountered while I was in Gambia, Senegal, and just let you know how when you go to Africa, you're glad to be back when you come back, although you understand the historical part of the legacy of blacks in this country. You're very glad when you get back because although we have a lot of fantasies about Africa, you're very glad to get back here where you have the conveniences that you're used to. And I will agree with Barack Obama when he said that we are more American than we think. Blacks are more American than they think that they are, and they can use those appellations like African American and things like that. But when you get to Africa, you can see how far removed you are from the cultures in Africa. And the word cultures is plural because we're talking about so many cultures in Africa that you would be hard pressed to identify with any single one because they are all so culturally distinct. So this idea that there is one Africa and that you can be an African American, you'd be surprised at how meaningless that is once you get there and you see it for yourself. The idea that there you can say, you could even claim African American, you don't even realize over here how meaningless that is. You know, it's a lot of myths. When you get outside of America, a lot of things are clarified, and I had a lot of wake up moments in this 3 week period of time. One of them was just looking at our propaganda over here in the United States. It's amazing how much propaganda goes on. You can't see it as much being here because it's such a ongoing attack upon consciousness in this country. But on the outside, you had a chance to see some news that is objective. I think the most objective news that I encountered was in Ghana. I actually saw some actual news reporting in Africa. And I come back here and I look at what they're doing with the New York Times and what Google is doing and what they're doing on CNN and MSNBC. It's just a tragedy what is happening in this country. And from afar, you can see how far off base we are in the United States. These institutions in America are almost totally corrupt. I don't know of an institution in America right now. Certainly not the media. You can't say that Congress is not corrupt. And you look at the government institutions in general, and the country, I don't know where we're heading, but if we continue down this road, it's not going to end well. And being in Africa, you can look back and see how much of a problem this country is actually in because we're being led to hell by the political leaders in this country. I'm sorry to report this, but when you're on the outside, you can see the whole picture a lot better. And we're being consumed by people in this country that are leading this country astray. The politicians, the media, government leaders. I don't trust any of the members in Congress. And the only person really that is trying to right the ship of state is Donald Trump, the outsider. All those inside of the Beltway, those persons that are the traditional and career politicians, I don't think any of them are. We don't have anyone in our Congress right now, Democrats or Republicans, that are representatives of American people. Both parties are corrupt. And I put that into context because when I was in Africa, that's what I saw over there. I saw tremendous corruption on the continent of Africa. Although I don't think I don't think that the news is as corrupt in Africa as it is here. In fact, I said Ghana. I saw news that was actually being reported. Just the facts. I didn't see anyone in Ghana's news that was putting this propaganda on the screen. It was amazing to compare what Ghana's news was reporting and what's reported on. Look at the New York Times today, where they had to back down from a report about Kavanaugh. All they do is check and see if the source is right. The person we're talking about having encountered Kavanaugh having done something that was sexually untoward and unfit for his position. All they do is go and ask the woman if that happened, and the woman says she cannot remember the occurrence. And the New York Times ran with that. Now they have to walk it back, and it's just, the corruption is just stunning. Our media in America is totally corrupt. And to look at the third world, where you have a media, and Ghana, although it's one of the better run African countries, is still a third world country. And they have a media that is much more honest in their reporting than they are in the United States. You would not expect that to happen. But I can tell you that that's what I encountered. And I watched that news for 3 weeks because I was so impressed with how they were reporting what was actually happening without all the propaganda we get in the United States. There's a lot of propaganda in this country. Very little of what they're reporting is not propaganda. We're not getting news. We're getting an agenda that's being placed on the screen. These news shows are not reporting news. They're reporting the propaganda of the country, of the ruling class in this country. And I was in Ghana looking back, watching it, and comparing CNN, MSNBC, to a less extent, but still to an extent, Fox Network. The entire news industry is fake news. And there's something that can be taught to the Western media through the lens of what I saw coming out of Ghana, which I think I didn't see any news over there that topped it. Seemed like Ghana was one of the top news entities on the continent. And I saw other stations also, but I was really impressed with how they were able to extract the politics from the news reporting. And they did a very good job of that. They're not doing it in the United States. What you have in this country, as we speak, is that you have a constant dose of people propagandizing and brainwashing the listeners and the viewers in the news media. I don't know of any report that I would say is 100% or even close to that, reporting what is actually happening from an objective standpoint. All of them are corrupt. The news in this country is corrupt. And to compare it with what I saw in Africa, you can see the corruption. Google, tremendous influence in Africa. And I can see how they are promoting an agenda based upon how they promote, for example, Barack Obama in Africa, and how they promote Donald Trump in Africa. I was over there trying to make a correction about what a disaster, and I would say it here, and I'd say it in Africa as well, what a disaster Barack Obama was in this country. He was a disaster. I don't care what Google allows on the in the mainstream, and what CNN is putting out and MSNBC. Barack Obama was a disaster. Was a disaster for the United States, and over there, you find that Barack Obama, they treat him, they look at him as if he is some kind of savior. One person told me in Gambia, said if you say that, he said nobody will listen to you. And my response was, I don't care if they listen to me or not. I'm going to tell the truth about Barack Obama. Barack Obama was a disaster in this country.
By the way, we have one of viewers said, chimed in today and said, the American dream is to be Donald Trump. So I mean, I got to. Yeah. I said I think you would agree on that. I mean, I do really think people like that.
Donald Trump is standing up for the American dream, and that's why we got to pull out all stops to get Donald Trump reelected in 2020, and that's going to happen. You've been watching those debates. You've been watching those debates, haven't you?
Actually, I've just listened to snippets afterwards because I got a blood pressure problem, and watching people just promise other people everybody else's paycheck irritates me. But also the person who responded to that, said that first, also said, and so Barack Obama also, I think they're meaning sort of Barack Obama would want to be Donald Trump as well. So yeah, I think so too. I mean,
Barack Obama was a disaster, but because the media treated him differently and did not hold him to account, people think this guy, and they have him listed as the 12th greatest president this country has ever had. Out of the 45 presidents we've had, really 44 different presidents, we had Cleveland, the 22nd and 24th president, so we've had 45 different presidents elected, but 44 different individuals. Barack Obama does not belong up there in the 12th slot. Barack Obama belongs down there with Buchanan and Jimmy Carter. This man, who they're walking around tepidly trying to act like he did something great for this country in the 8 years he was in the presidency. I'm here to tell Africa, I'm here to tell anybody else that's a media propaganda. Barack Obama was anti-American. And I said that in 2009. By the way, I voted for Barack Obama in 2008. But I'd be darned if I voted for him in 2012, because that can was open in 2009. I mean, I began to detect something was wrong with this man's persona 1 month after he had assumed office. It was very clear. The country had made a mistake. We elected the wrong person. Although, I'll say this also, although John McCain was not a good choice either. Because as quiet as it is kept, John McCain was ineligible to run for the presidency. And I'm here to tell you in case you don't know it. You can't be born outside of the United States and satisfy the requirements in Article 2, Section 5, Clause 1. I'll read it to you. I don't have to guess, because I understand the Constitution. And you criminals in Washington who are talking about grabbing guns, and that's what you're talking about, you guys are a bunch of criminals, all of you. I'll read that also. But let me read Article 2, and you tell me where it allows for John McCain to run for president of the United States. Obama was bad, but at least Obama was eligible to run for president. He was born in the United States. And that is not Obama's usurpation. Obama's usurpation is different from that. He was born in Hawaii, but his usurpation is they stood on the state house steps in Illinois, where Lincoln stood in 1858 in the Lincoln-Douglas debate, and was claiming that he had something to do with the history of those persons that were emancipated by Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, January the 1st, 1863. And that's a total misappropriation of history. Obama had nothing to do with that. His pedigree is not tied into that. I mean, it's amazing to me that people cannot, it's amazing how brainwashed this country is. You have to go outside, I guess, to see it. Because in the country, you're blocked by the trees. When you get outside the country and look back, you can see how brainwashed this country is. This country is brainwashed. Because they keep running a narrative, and over time, you begin to believe the narrative is true because everybody is saying it. MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, the Washington Post, all of this is propaganda. And those criminals in the Congress, how many of them? All of them. You can claim all that Democrat and Republican stuff if you want to. There are no Democrats in that body, and there are no Republicans in it. And I've said that before, and I keep saying it. Let me read Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. Let me read this to you. I want you to understand how this right here puts a damper on people like John McCain and others telling us that you can run for president and you're not born in the United States. Don't be telling me that you can be born under the flag somewhere else. That's not the requirement. In Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, it says this: no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Now, people say it doesn't define what a natural-born citizen is. You know what? And I hear scholars saying that, like Lawrence Tribe and Napolitano and Adam Dershowitz, these people are illiterate. You can't say stuff like that. When you have the document right in your hand and you're reading it, if you can read it, you can see that it is saying here that in order to be President of the United States, you have to be a natural-born citizen. This is written in 1787, ratified in 1788. So then, why did they put a caveat in there in the very next sentence, and they say this? At the time of the adoption of the Constitution, it says, no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. It makes an exception to the natural-born citizenship because the country at the time of the drafting of the Constitution, the country is only 11 years old. From 1776 to 1787. Therefore, there's a caveat in the language. You have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States. But because who will be eligible to run for president in 1788 when we had the first president elected in this country, who will be eligible to run for president, meeting the three requirements in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. And the three requirements are, you must be a natural-born citizen, 35 years of age, and 14 years a resident in the United States. Because no one fits that criteria, nobody is in the United States 14 years at that point. Because the United States does not exist until 1776. I mean, I get frustrated listening to these scholars that have zero understanding of the document that they claim to be experts in. They're not experts in it. This is what Donald Trump said. They're not the elite. He said, you're the elite. So John McCain wasn't eligible to run for president. So I voted for Barack Obama. That does not mean I believe anything this man was saying. You sit in Reverend Wright's church for 20 years with earmuffs on, and you didn't hear what that man was saying when he only had one sermon, and that is GD America. That was his sermon every Sunday. And Barack Obama never heard it. I voted for the person, out of the two person running, I voted for the Constitution, not for Barack Obama. I mean, I voted for him, yes, I did. But I was voting for the Constitution because I realized that John McCain was not eligible. You can't be born in the Panama Canal and claim that you put a flag over that and that makes you eligible under the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 says, no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. So if I read it to exclude that language where you won't get confused about the clause in between the main point, I read it this way. No person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of president. And the caveat is, or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. And nobody has asked a question. I don't think any scholar has asked it. Why is that caveat placed in that document? I'd like to see what Alan Dershowitz says about that. He's supposed to be the constitutional scholar. What does he have to say about that? Why is it there? So Barack Obama was elected in 2008 because what choice did they have? John McCain wasn't eligible. In order to make him eligible to be president, you'd have to suspend the Constitution. But when Barack Obama ran in 2012, that excuse was no longer there. Because Mitt Romney ran. He wasn't anything either. But at least he was eligible to run for the presidency under the Constitution of the United States. And Barack Obama had proven that he was anti-American in the 4 years that he was in office. This man and Michelle Obama also. I have never seen a first family that had more venom against this country than the Barack Obama family. They detest this country. And I don't know how many times you saw pictures of this man giving this country the finger. How did you miss that? Where the man's putting his middle finger up there repeatedly. I mean the middle finger, not this finger, the middle finger. And throwing the finger up there to the public. And how many of you saw when they went over there with the memorial for those 5 officers, how many of you saw Michelle Obama doing this? In other words, she wasn't shedding any tears. And this went on for 8 years and people could not catch that. So I'm in Africa, right? And they're telling me, George, if you say that in Africa, nobody's going to listen to you. Well, I said a lot of things in Africa. And some of them were listening. Because I went into not only that, I went into what I went over there for, quite frankly, was go over there and take some of my study group members over there to the Roots Memorial. You know, the Alice Haley thing that came out in 1976. You probably remember Roots, those of you that are old enough to go back to the 70s. And you saw where Alice Haley did the saga of an American family, a 12-part series called Roots. And this program supposedly was how Kunta Kinte was brought to the Americas in 1767. And out of that came Alice Haley's roots that he traced back to the Juveray group in Alberta. And so I want to take some members of the study group back there where they could see that this was, fictional nonsense. Okay, I see we're coming up on a break from WFOV. So we'll take our break at this point, and they'll be back in 4 minutes. And we'll be on the other side of the break, and we'll welcome you back at that time. What I'm ranting about right now is that you run into some of the same views, because Google is really a powerful machine around the world. You don't realize how powerful it is until you get outside the country and you see it. But the news over there, not all of the stations now, but the over-encompassing view is Google has a large influence. Facebook has a large influence. And so a lot of the images that you have that you're playing into comes out of what they're doing in those media. But I was over there to tell the truth, that Obama was an abomination. It was a disaster for this country, and that is, of course, true. And he continues to be a disaster as long as he's up there having influence. There's nothing comes out of it good for the country, because Obama still is attacking this country, and so are those Democrats, who have got to be defeated in 2020. This country is at a crossroads, and it does not have any choice. There's no choice to make in 2020. If we are a sane country, there is no choice to be made. Donald Trump is the only thing standing between the American dream and losing this country, the purpose for which it was founded by the framers. That's how close we are to losing this country. And those liberals that are running, those 10 persons on that stage last debate they had, every last one of them is a danger to this country. Especially O'Rourke, the guy talking about, yes, we're going to take your guns. Let me read something to you, O'Rourke. Let me read to you Amendment 2. Let me read this to you. And you tell me how you can get on that stage and make that comment you made.
Do you notice on the stage, too, you never see the American flag?
That's another thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of, people point that out.
Right.
Not that I watch, I just see snippets,
Yeah,
And,
you can watch it for 3 hours. John, here's the language right here. The relevant language is the second part of the statement. There's no wiggle room here. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So you're talking about background checks. You're talking about mandatory buyback guns and so on and so forth. What do you think the words mean when they say the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed? How do you interpret that? And in fact, that language cannot be amended in the Constitution. In other words, you can't even pass an amendment to restrict the amendment, because it says this in the amendment: the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You can't even pass an amendment that would in fact negate that. Shall not be infringed. And they're not even talking about amending the Constitution. They're talking about simply acting as if the language is not there. And this is another example of propaganda and a cover-up. What's being covered up here?
I've talked to liberals who try to say where they say provide for the federal welfare and the general welfare. That means you can have welfare programs. And I'm saying, first of all, there is no means to be able to gather income tax, the ability to pay for that. And there's no ability to distribute that back then. They didn't have things like debits and all that stuff. And the other thing is, too, the personal income tax wasn't added until, 1913? So how was that from the onset meant to mean welfare programs? But now they have an issue with the Second Amendment saying it doesn't mean what we conservatives think it means. It's supposed to mean something else. It means regulation. Well, but the militia is the people, and that was always a known back then. Before we dumbed down our population. So anyway, that's my editorial right there.
Yeah,
so
well, you're making a good point. We can go to the father of the Constitution to negate that idea, because James Madison said, when they tried to find something in the Constitution that would justify them opening up the purse to benevolence, it was Madison who said that he is challenged to find a single word in the Constitution that allows the government to open up its treasury to the general welfare. Where would that be? It's not any different than the point Walter Williams makes at George Mason University, where he says that, where he asks a question, he says, how much of what I earn belongs to someone else, and then tell me why? Here's the government taking wealth from someone that earned it and then distributing it in the name of the government and then calling it charity. These people are criminals. Taxation must be seen for what it is. Taxation is theft. And you only tax to the extent that you do that which is constitutionally allowed. That means that Article 1, Section 8, and the 18 clauses that are found therein, those are the restraints on which you can actually use the public treasury to do. It's itemized in Article 1, Section 8. And they've created this big behemoth of a government right now that's out of control because the politicians in this country are corrupt. When I was in Africa, 2 leaders on the continent of Africa died while I was there. One of them was the person that I called in 2007. I called him what he was, despicable. I said it in South Africa. When I was talking to government leaders, they were trying to cover up this man's violations of human rights in Zimbabwe, formerly Southern Rhodesia. I'm talking about Robert Mugabe. Many people were saying when Mugabe came to power in 1980, they were saying worse than Smith. Ian Smith was the colonial leader of Southern Rhodesia, later on Zimbabwe, and Mugabe was worse than Smith. And it hurt my feelings for these people like Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, talking about what a great leader he was, and even had the nerve to say he was a Pan-Africanist. Pan-Africanism in Africa is a non-starter. There's not going to be any Pan-Africanism in Africa. And anybody that talks about, for example, Dr. What's this guy's name? Calls himself the Prince of Pan-Africanism. You know something. You go to Africa and see how crazy we are. We're talking nonsense. Almost all the conversation about race in this country is nonsense. Almost all of them. The reparations argument, all that, total nonsense. So I'm over there. Mugabe dies. Everybody's making a big mockery of this man's legacy, talking about what a great leader he was. Mugabe was worse than Smith. And the claim he was a Pan-Africanist, the man was oppressing people in Zimbabwe. The other leader that died while I was there was a statesman from Gambia, and that is daughter Barakata Zawara, who was legitimately elected in 1970 and was the founding president of Gambia. Great leader. I was there at his memorial service, and I was there to pay respect for one of the few African leaders that did not open up the public treasury to the criminal element in the country. Does not mean there was not some corruption. But I think that Jawara, if you look at his record, Jawara was a great leader for the times that he was in. And when they tried to overthrow him in 1981, they tried to overthrow his government while he was attending the wedding of Princess Diana. And they tried to run a coup d'etat. And Jawara came back, went to Dakar. Dakar is the capital of Senegal, next door. As you know, Senegal surrounds Gambia on three sides. Gambia only has one outlet to the sea, to the Atlantic Ocean, to the west. But otherwise, it's totally surrounded by Senegal. So he went to Dakar after they tried to overthrow him and had run a coup d'etat while he was outside the country. He went and appealed to Abdou Diaf. Diaf was the president of Senegal, having succeeded Leopold Senghor. And so they created a confederation, and Senegal went in there and stopped the coup. I think there's like 800 persons that died in that attempt. And they restored Zawara back to power. But Zawara then decides he needs an army. And later on, that proves to be his downfall, because after 24 years of rule, then this other madman, Yahya Jammeh, overthrew Zawara in 1994 and stayed in power until 2017, when he lost an election and refused to leave. And the AU, the African Unity Group, put their tanks on the streets in Gambia and didn't go in to fight, but let him know that they were there as part of the ECOWAS, and they're going to be there until Jammeh left. And this is another thing about these politicians. When they come from behind their mask, you can see who they really are. When Jammeh finally did leave, he took 85 million euros out of the country. 85 million euros. By the way, didn't touch the dollars. The dollar's not worth anything compared to euros. And now he's living in Equatorial Guinea. But they told Jammeh that you had to leave. And Jammeh said that if you come into Gambia, my soldiers will in fact resist. But they just simply stayed on the outskirts, putting pressure on Jammeh. And told him he had no choice. And Jammeh finally left. When I was there in Gambia, I did notice the ECOWAS is still there. Because they think that Jammeh may try to come back. And so you saw some residue of the ECOWAS meaning ECOWAS, the Economic Community West African states. And they have some residual parts of their military still there because they think that Jammeh may still have some inclination to come back in there with his apparatus, but that's not going to happen. The people are glad that Jammeh is gone. And Jammeh was a terrorist. I wonder if these Pan-Africans are willing to say that. You know, we're so down on criticizing anything European, but we don't want to do the critique inside of the race about things that are wrong inside of the African population. The guy I was trying to think of earlier, the guy named Johnson, who called himself the Prince of Pan-Africanism. I did appreciate him taking Obama to task, but he would not do that in terms of these African leaders. I've not heard one criticism of what Cyril Ramaphosa is doing in South Africa right now. Throwing those European settlers off the land without compensation. You're making the same mistake in South Africa that they made in Zimbabwe. We don't learn anything from history. The same mistake that Mugabe made, they're making the same mistake in South Africa, and it's going to end up the same way. They're doing that right now in South Africa. I was there in 2000, and my last time in South Africa was 2 years ago. And we had a lot of discussions on the sideline about what was going on in the country. You'd be surprised at how many people told me that they were better off under the apartheid regime than they are under these silly African leaders like Cyril Ramaphosa. And this other madman that has 6% of the parliament, Julius Malema, who used to be part of the ANC, but was so radical that he's now formed the the PPP, the People's Political Party in South Africa. But the 60% that is by the ANC, and the 6% by Malema, they combined to change the constitution put in place by Mandela. And it's out of that change in the constitution that allowed them to take the land from the settlers without compensation and then put these people on the land that don't have any farming experience. You're going the same way as Zimbabwe and South Africa. It's only a matter of time. They already having water shortages. Right across the way is the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, and they got a water crisis. You know why? Because the people are not allowed to work in South Africa that have the skills, because they have a percentage of how many whites can work inside of the engineering, the government, you name it. The farming, they make up 8%, therefore 8%. So they put a 8% limit on the meritocracy in Africa. That is a destructive policy. It may play well politically, but in terms of how it's going to play out economically and even politically in the long run, you're going to see the same thing happening there. It's already beginning to happen. Do you know the way to San Jose? Well, do you know the way to Zimbabwe? Because that's where South Africa is heading. And within 10 years or less, at the rate they're going right now, it will arrive there. They're well on the way to where Mugabe took Zimbabwe. Because the people that do not understand and learn from history are doing repeated mistakes, and that's true all over Africa. I've been in 18 countries now. 18 countries in Africa. And I've seen this everywhere I've been. But I'm trying. What I'm trying to do is just be a person that's willing to state what is true. I don't care about whether they listen or not. That's not my objective. My objective is to state the truth. In fact, when I went to Kunta Kinte's site, the alleged Kunta Kinte site, because all that stuff that Alex Haley wrote, all that stuff is just fictional nonsense. Alex Haley was a plagiarist. All that stuff in that book. You can go read other books and read what Alex Haley, where he got his information from. Fiddler, for example, is Solomon Northup. In the movie that they made of Solomon Northup called 12 Years a Slave. That's where he got Fiddler from. Fiddler was from the autobiography of Solomon Northup. And he took a lot of his work from the book called The African, which was Colander's book, Harold Colander's book. I guess people don't know that Alex Haley paid Harold Colander $750,000 an out-of-court fee because the plagiarism was very obvious. The court told Alex Haley, look, if you're trying to contend that you didn't plagiarize from this book, look at this passage and then look at what you wrote in your book. The words here are an exact replica of the words in the book. You can't claim that that's not plagiarism. And he told Alex Haley to go outside the courtroom and make a settlement, because if he does not make a settlement, it's going to be much worse from the courtroom. And the only reason that NBC, CBS, and those other networks did not bring that out is because they wanted this narrative to stand. And the narrative is that Europeans went on the African land space. They grabbed Africans out of Africa, put them on the boat, and shipped them over to the West. And they tried that narrative in Albreda when I was there, in Juffure. They tried that when I was there. And I made the correction to that. And they admitted that, I mean, that's because you said that for people who don't know. But when I made the correction about what they were saying, because I know the history very well, and I'm willing to say what is true. Europeans did not go into Africa during the slave trade, kicking the doors in and grab Africans out of Africa. That did not happen. And I'm going to read it to you so you won't have this illusion that that's what happened, because that's not what happened. Let me read page 207 of this book put out by Louis Gates at Harvard University. He didn't know anything either, but at least he was able to quote some people that had the information straight. On page 207, 207 and 208 of this book, called Wonders of the African World. And I wish I could show you these cannons they had on the land space, both in Juffure and also when I was in Ghana in 2006 or 2007. I don't know if you can see this or not on the screen, but I want you to look at these cannons. This is in a slave fort in Ghana. This is in Elmina. You see all those cannons? I don't know if you can see it on the screen or not, but these cannons are all aimed out toward the water. And that's very significant when you understand that they're aimed toward the water, because the threat is not coming from the interior, not from the land. Because the slave trade is Europeans trading with people on the continent of Africa. I'll read something about that in just a minute. I said from the continent of Africa, not Africans. Hold on, I'll clear it up in just a minute. But let me read to you what a woman I sat next to her in 2000 and 2000, I think it was 2000 and 2006. I sat next to Dr. Akosha Purby. We had lunch together. And she's the one that is informing Gates about the slave trade. And this is what she's telling Gates in this book called Wonders of the African World that he uses as part of the series. She says, in Ghana, it is a breach of decorum to be too interested in slavery. After all, many Ghanaians are the descendants of slaves, incorporated into family clans, and might take offense if asked a lot of probing questions. But truth be told, slavery for most Ghanaians is not something which they feel implicated. It is mostly a concern of Americans. Dr. Purby, while entirely sympathetic with my concerns, cautioned me to remember that to Africans, slavery was not about race, but about power and money. Those Africans, and the word African needs to be put in quotation marks, those Africans who were rich and powerful enough to get involved in the slave trade did so, in their view, at least, on an equal basis with the Europeans. This trade is a trade between equals, the elite in Africa with the slave traders that have come from Europe. And the involved in the slave trade is equals. Forts such as Elmina. Elmina is the first slave fort in Africa. Forts such as Elmina were built on land leased, L-E-A-S-E-D, leased to European powers by powerful African rulers. And in these parts, the power belongs to the Ashanti. To know the origins of the slave trade, this is Dr. Purby talking. To know the origins of the slave trade, she advised me, this is Gates is saying she advised me quietly, one must know the Ashanti. And as far as they were concerned, the Ashanti were concerned, she added, and Ashanti herself, they were not selling their brothers or sisters into slavery. They were selling strangers, foreigners, enemies, and captives. Okay, I read that part, and I'm going to read this part here from the book by Alan Missouri called The Africans. This is a series that was put on PBS in 1986. And they didn't like him when he wrote this part in his book called The Africans. But here's what he wrote in chapter 4, page 99. See, this word African has to be put in quotation marks. It says, one of the great ironies of modern African history, one of the great ironies, is that it took European colonialism to inform Africans that they were Africans. It took European colonialism to inform Africans that they were Africans. This chapter is partly about the white man's creation of the African identity within the African continent and the white man's destruction of the African identity in the African diaspora abroad. What Missouri is getting at is that the idea of Africa as a single polity is looking at Africa through the European gaze. And so when I hear people like Dr. Johnson saying that he's a prince of Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism in Africa is impossible. And he's dishonest in claiming it because he's been to Africa. And if you've been to Africa, you have to be aware, you can't avoid it, is that Africa is ethnic diverse. If you think that you're going to put Africa under one ethnic umbrella, that's impossible. Because the question is, which ethnic group will be the all-encompassing group under which that umbrella is housing all the other groups? And you don't take my word for that. Go look at the South African Constitution, where it recognizes 11 indigenous languages in Africa so as to keep the polity together. Because to recognize one language, let's say you would do it with the Hausa, the ANC's language, but you don't recognize Buthelez's group, the group that is Zulu. If you recognize Hausa and not Zulu, you got a problem. So it recognizes 11 languages in the Constitution. I know that because I read it. So anybody talking about they are the prince of Pan-Africanism, that's because they know you've not been to the continent. There's not going to be any Pan-Africanism in Africa, period. Because Africa is too diverse for that. And that's what they mean by African history, is that it took Europeans to tell Africans that they're Africans. Because before that, they were their own indigenous groups, different ones, and so on. I invite you to go there, because when you come back awakened to the fact that what's going on here is a lot of noise, and very little of what we're talking about in this country about race is real. It's all fantasy. Okay, I'm getting out of here. Hope you will stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com. If you don't, and also don't forget to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.